Welcome everybody to Dinner from Death Row, your favorite, probably the only true crime cooking show. And I'm your host, Colleen Pecho. Promise this whole episode won't rhyme. But today's a very special episode, not just because it's the first episode, but because we are covering a heavy hitter. One of the most prolific serial killers in all of history. You know him, you hate him. He's your favorite clown from my hometown, John Wayne Gacy. Now, before we can get into the gruesome details of everything about Gacy's life, we do need to talk about what he had as his last meal on death row. So what Gacy chose as his last meal on this heavenly earth was KFC. That's right, Kentucky Fried Chicken. And he could have chose anything, even the far superior chicken from Popeyes. And if you disagree, come at me. I don't care. He could have chosen anything, and he chose the chicken from Colonel Sanders' Poultry Palace. The most upsetting part about this entire story is that Gacy used to work at KFC. He managed one for like 10 years. And he chose to have that as his last meal before they killed him. I worked in a restaurant for 5 years, and I never want to eat there again. If that was my last meal on death row, I deserve to be dead. Before we can even get into cooking all this food, I do want to acknowledge this story. There's so many parts of it, and I can't get through all of it because there's only so much food to prep, only so much time. This means no disrespect to any victims or their families of this tragic story. I also want to acknowledge our main source for today, and that is the last book on the left. Marcus Parks, I love you. And if you guys there didn't make last podcast on the left, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. So I just want to say thank you. But without further ado, let's get into the horrifying story of John Wayne Gacy. Everybody, before we get started into this terrifying, awful story, we really need to talk about what we're actually making today. So Gacy's actual full last meal was KFC's fried chicken, fried shrimp, French fries, and strawberries. You know, we all need a balanced diet all the way through death row. So what we're going to make today first is the 12 secret blends of herbs and spices from KFC. You know, this Colonel's original recipe. I did tweak a couple of things just based on personal preference for amounts for a few ingredients, but besides that, it is very authentic. So what's going into this blend today is going to be paprika, 1 tablespoon and 1 teaspoon, white pepper, 1 tablespoon, garlic salt, 2 teaspoons, mustard seeds, 1.5 teaspoon, black pepper, 1 teaspoon, ground ginger, 1 teaspoon, celery salt, 1 teaspoon, MSG, 3/4 teaspoon, oregano, 1/2 teaspoon, basil, 1/2 teaspoon, thyme, 1/2 teaspoon, and salt. 1/2 teaspoon. So we're going to put all this together into the spice grinder, and it'll make our awesome chicken brine spicing for today. And start getting into this disgusting, horrifying story. March 17th, 1942. John Wayne Gacy was born to the loving, but not so much parents, John and Marion Gacy. Now, he was named John Wayne Gacy after the famous actor cowboy, John Wayne. And his parents named him that because they wanted him to be the epitome of masculinity. So he named him John Wayne and had high hopes for him. But Gacy didn't exactly turn out how his dad wanted him to be. He actually was born with an enlarged bottleneck heart, which meant that he couldn't participate in any physical activity, couldn't do any sports. So honestly, right off the bat, Gacy was a huge disappointment to his father. His dad really didn't like him. He didn't like that he couldn't be athletic, couldn't be the manly man that he always sought him to be. At about age 4, Gacy's dad started abusing him. They were in the garage and he was helping him, like holding the wrench and stuff while he was working on the car. Gacy knocked something over and his dad hit him for the first time. This is a long-term abuse that we're going to see throughout this. He had a really terrible upbringing, just an excusable monster that he would become, but he really had a really tough childhood. His dad also was beating his mom throughout this entire time, and Gacy had to watch his dad beat his mom in front of him. So the abuse continues. Age 7, Gacy started going on ride-alongs with his dad's friend. His dad's friend was a contractor. He would take Gacy on these ride-alongs, show him around the contracting companies, show him like what it's like to be on the job. But those ride-alongs swiftly turned into wrestling matches, which unfortunately was this dude pushing Gacy's face down by his genitalia. Gacy never reported this abuse to his dad or his mom at all. He didn't want to say anything because he knew what his dad would say. His dad would call him a fruit picker, which was his favorite insult. He called his kid that for his entire life. Gacy didn't want his dad to find out. At age 11, Gacy suffered from traumatic head trauma. He was at a swing set. The swing came back, knocked him in the back of the head. He had permanent brain damage from this incident. And I don't want to say, if your kid has traumatic head injury, that you should get rid of them. But I will just say, there's so many people that have traumatic head injuries that did not turn out okay. These people being John Wayne Gacy, Ed Gein, Ed Kemper, and Jerry Brudos. So, if now you're thinking about that one time when you took little Johnny to the park and he fell out of his baby Bjorn onto the ground, and his eyes bugged out of his head and he was never the same again, you're now wondering, is my kid gonna slit my throat in my sleep someday? The answer is yes. You should get rid of him. Boarding school is always an option. The lifelong abuse continues for Gacy. He's having a really hard time in his life. And until he got out at age 20, he had to suffer through this entire thing. So at age 20, Gacy decides to move out, finally, from Illinois and his parents' house. He decides to move to Vegas. Hell yeah, you know, the city of lights. But Gacy's first job there, he was a mortuary assistant. Honestly, that sounds pretty cool to me. I'm down for it. Gacy didn't last very long at this position because they found him in a casket with a dead little boy. That's right. He got into work and like a couple days in, he's just like, you know, I'm a little tired. I'm a little cold. I could use a nap. So he got into a casket with a dead boy, curled up next to him, and fell asleep. He was found this way. They decided, yeah, maybe this isn't the best fit. So Gacy moved on. Quickly after that, he met his wife, Marlon. Despite them, you know, being in love, Marlon's dad hated him. I'm not sure if he got, you know, those killer clown vibes or something that sometimes you get from people. Looking at you, a couple of my ex-boyfriends. But sometimes you get that vibe from somebody, you know something's wrong. Gacy's father-in-law absolutely hated him. But eventually, he realized his wife was in love and he'd offer Gacy an opportunity at a new job. He had a KFC franchise going right in Iowa. He offered Gacy the opportunity to manage one of these KFC franchises. Gacy picked up his stuff with Marlon and they moved to Waterloo, Iowa. Gacy starts running this KFC franchise. Things are actually going pretty well for him. He's got a wife, he's got a solid job, and then he joined this fraternal organization called the JCs. Many of us have never heard of the JCs. I wouldn't have if it weren't for this story. There's actually quite a few famous ones that you might have heard of. We got Richard Nixon, we got Bill Clinton. So if we're looking at, you know, possibly impeached presidents, maybe Trump was one too, we just don't know. But there was also Larry Bird, my favorite, because you know, Larry's not white. Larry's clear. But the last one I want to mention, just because I love him in a terrible, disgusting way, is the co-ed killer, the biggest dumb goon in the world, Ed Kemper, who I'm happy to have mentioned 2 times in this episode already. So he starts having these parties with the JCs. They're part of this fraternal organization, so you know what they did? They would have these stag parties where they would watch porn and drink beer together. Nothing says, you know, fraternal organization like porn parties. Am I right? And he starts becoming a pretty well-respected member of society in Iowa. Things are going super well, and he's liking where he's at. And these stag parties did eventually influence him to make parties of his own with his KFC employees. But we'll get into that in a second. First, we're gonna throw all these ingredients together and throw them in the grinder. We'll put in the paprika, the white pepper, garlic salt, mustard seeds, black pepper, ground ginger, celery salt, the best ever MSG, makes everything amazing, oregano, basil, thyme, and lastly, salt. So here we have it. This is our 12 secret blends of herbs and spices, courtesy of the Colonel himself. So we're gonna throw this in the spice grinder and keep going on with this story. All right, last thing that's left to do is to grind up our spice blend. So I'm gonna use a spice grinder because I'm lazy and I don't wanna use a mortar and pestle, but if that's what you have, please do. So make it easier. I'm gonna pour it all in there and I'm gonna pour it all in here. Spice blend for a KFC fried chicken is all ready to go. All right, everybody, we are ready to move on to the next steps with our chicken. So to make this brine that's gonna sit in overnight, we're gonna do the spice blend that we just made. We got a teaspoon of kosher salt, 16 ounces of buttermilk, and chicken. To make more of a bucket theme, I did thighs, legs, and wings. But, you know, if you're more of a breast person, am I right? You can do that as well. So at this point in our horrible story, John Wayne Gacy is having his parties with the Jaycees. He influenced him to start parties of his own. So he started throwing these parties for his KFC employees. And the way that he got him over there was that he would invite them over and be like, hey, I got beer, weed, and a pool table. And I'm not gonna lie, that would get me to come over, so it's a really good ruse. That sounds like a pretty damn good party. So Gacy would invite them over, offer these things to him, and he'd start getting drunk, and he'd start using these ruses to manipulate them. And that's really the big steps for making this MO that solidified throughout his entire serial killing career, was this levels of manipulation. So he would use these ruses, where he'd be like, hey man, if you come over, we'll play some pool, and if I win, you gotta give me a BJ. Or he'd also be like, hey man, you know, you can have sex with my wife, but first, how about a BJ? But also, probably the best and most laughable one of his ruses, Gacy would tell these kids, hey, I'm conducting this experiment for the governor of Illinois. It's about homosexuality, so how about a BJ? This is a really common theme with Gacy, and this is what we're going to see throughout the rest of this story, is these ways that he can manipulate these kids and assert dominance and control over them. And this is what he's going to do for the rest of this story and how he gets away with what he did for such a long time. All right, now the chicken is all set and ready to go. We're just going to let this sit in the fridge overnight, and we're going to continue on with our prep for french fries. All right, everybody, we are going to the next step in our meal, which is preparing the potatoes for the french fries that was part of his last meal. So let's get going. Now we are going to julienne these potatoes so we can make them into french fries. One of his first victims, at least that we know of, was 15-year-old Donald Voorhees. No relation to Jason. Donald Voorhees was another employee of Gacy at KFC. And Gacy would invite him over, they'd get drunk, but then Gacy would molest him. He would make Donald recount what had just happened to him. And this is a common theme that you're gonna see throughout this entire story, is all Gacy wants is control over everything and everybody around him, because it's what makes him feel like that masculine man that his dad so much wanted him to be. So he attacked Donald, and he eventually just drove him home and dropped him off like nothing had happened. Pretended that everything was all right. And Donald, you know, he was alone in this situation. He was really nervous to come forward. The next victim was Edward Lynch. Edward Lynch is another one of Gacy's KFC employees. So Gacy would invite him over, they'd get drunk, they'd hang out, and the first time that they really hung out, Gacy just offered him oral sex, and Edward just laughed about it. He didn't think it was a real, legitimate offer, but then that laughter made Gacy mad. So what he did is he grabbed a knife, and he forced Edward into his bedroom. And upon forcing him upon there and the hubbub that happened around it, he accidentally cut Edward's arm open. Edward started bleeding. And as soon as Gacy saw that blood, he stopped. He froze. Snapped him out of everything, and he realized what he was doing. So immediately he just starts apologizing. He's like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's okay. We'll just hang out. Nothing to worry about. Let's just watch a movie. So they did start watching a movie. They started watching porn. Again, which is just a thing in this entire story, which I just don't get. They're hanging out, they're watching porn. Gacy grabs one of his longest standing ploys of how he murdered boys. It's like, hey Edward, can I show you a magic trick? It's something I've been working on recently. So he had this rope trick that he would do, and he would bind people behind their back. So that's what he did to Edward. And Edward immediately got nervous, understandable. Gacy immediately goes from there. He starts to strangle him. Edward was a genius. And I will give this advice that I learned. If anybody ever strangles you, pretend to pass out. You black out right away. Oh my God, you're so good at strangling. I'm passed out immediately. That's what you should do. That's what Edward did. And immediately, Gacy realized, holy crap, this guy's already dead. Or he's passed out or something. So he took him, he put him in his car, and just dropped him off at home. Luckily, Edward got away, I don't want to say unscathed. It was very traumatic for him, but he definitely got away at least. Edward Lynch and Voorhees, they start talking. They're like, hey man, some weird stuff kind of happened over there. And they bonded over it, but they both realized that they were really scared to come forward. They talked about it, and eventually Donald Voorhees was like, you know what, I need to say something, because other people are going to get hurt too. Donald Voorhees came forward to the police. The police were starting to have tangible evidence against John Wayne Gacy, and he was indicted for it. Took a lie detector test, which he failed, But the community was divided. They still kind of backed Gacy because they were like, oh, he's such an upstanding citizen. He's so good in our community. People didn't want to believe what was actually in front of their face. So from there, Gacy actually was out of prison. He was still awaiting a sentence. He decided to ask one of his employees, a bunch of minions apparently, to do his dirty work. He asked Russell Schroeder to go beat up Donald Voorhees. He was like, hey, I'll give you $300. Go kick the snot out of this kid because he shouldn't have told on me and it's making me look bad. Russell Schroeder, he's just a kid. You know, he was just like $300, beat some kid up. All right, why not? So he did. He went and he took Donald Voorhees into the woods and he hit him with a plank. And luckily, Donald was so smart that he wrestled away and he got away and he ran. And when he got to the police, this time there was complete evidence that they knew something was going to be charged. As soon as he said, like, hey, Russell Schroeder tried to beat me up, they brought Russell Schroeder in. What did Russell Schroeder do? He rolled over on Gacy immediately. He's just a kid. No questions asked. He's like, yeah, he did it. This is his fault. He paid me $300 to beat this kid up. Gacy gets brought back into jail. They had complete tangible evidence, no way of getting around. After way too much abuse, John Wayne Gacy was finally put into prison. He had a 10-year charge for sodomy. Unfortunately, Gacy was a model prisoner. He was so great. He was still working on his JC's stuff, you know, being a campaigning guy in prison. And his behavior was so good that he made parole after only 18 months. This shouldn't happen, and it does all the time. But he's out now. He's out in the wild enjoying his time of freedom, and he decides to go back to one of the only people that still cares about him. He went to his mother's house in Chicago. From there, he started a construction company, and Mother Dearest bought him a house in Des Plaines to continue his path of rage. Everybody, we are moving on to our next steps, which is making a Cajun seasoning for our fries. It's not necessarily what he had on his fries, but I want a Cajun fries, and this blend is super good, so that's what we're going to do today. So in our blend, we're going to put 2 tablespoons cayenne, 2 tablespoons of garlic powder, 2 tablespoons of onion powder, 2 tablespoons of sweet paprika, 1.5 tablespoons of salt, 1 teaspoon of crushed red pepper, 1 teaspoon of oregano, 1 teaspoon of thyme, 1 teaspoon of chili powder, 1 teaspoon of white powder. That's cocaine. 1 teaspoon of white pepper. Try that one. 1 teaspoon of white pepper, 1 teaspoon of black peppercorns, and 1 bay leaf. So we're gonna measure all these out, throw them together, put them in the grinder again, and our Cajun seasoning will be ready. Where we left off last is Gacy just got out of prison. 18 months he served there, which is we won't talk about anymore. But he gets out of prison and he moves back to Chicago with his mom because, you know, that's what you do when you get out of prison. So Gacy moves back in with his mom and he starts his own construction company. And as you remember, he used to go on those ride-alongs with a contractor back when he was young, despite how horrifying and terrible those were. It did influence him becoming a contractor later in life. So he starts his company and things are actually going very well for him. And his company becomes pretty successful kind of right off the bat. You know, he's making over $100,000 a year. He's doing great. He also starts reconnecting with old acquaintances that he used to have before he went to prison. And he started talking to Kathy Hull, who he went to high school with. And eventually, they got married. And along with that came 2 stepdaughters. At this point, it seems like everything's going to be fine for Gacy. You know, he has a new family, he has a good company, and things are kind of going well. But, you know, these underlying desires that he always have really aren't going to go anywhere. They're just going to go below the surface for a while. January 2nd, 1972, Gacy is at a family gathering. His Aunt Pearl had passed away, so family's getting together. The wake was going to be the next day. So at some point he says, hey, you know what? I'm not feeling so well. I'm going to go home. But instead of going home, Gacy went to the Greyhound station where he picked up 16-year-old Timothy McCoy. Now, Timothy is what we like to know as the less dead, and that's what we're going to see throughout most of the rest of the story, is those are the people that Gacy would pick up. The less dead are pretty much people that aren't going to be missed as much, or people won't notice that they're missing. And we see that in pretty much every serial killer ever. You know, sex workers and the homeless are people that are murdered the most because not as many people will notice that they are gone. Gacy goes, he picks up Timothy McCoy, and he brings him back to his house. And they get drunk, they're having a good time, they fool around for a bit, and then Gacy ends up falling asleep. And Gacy wakes up the next morning to see Timothy standing in his bedroom with a knife. And immediately before, asking a question or saying like, hey, what are you doing there? Gacy just gets up, rips the knife from Timothy's hand, and stabs him in the chest and stomach 4 times. And he leaves him there, bleeding out on his rug. Then Gacy goes into his kitchen and he notices, oh, there's bacon out and there's a full breakfast prepared. And Timothy was just actually coming to tell Gacy that breakfast was ready that he'd made for him while he was asleep. This is kind of the point where you're seeing this monster is never going to come back. Even despite having a new family, having this new job, this kind of solidifies he will never be able to change. The most fucked up thing is he attended his aunt's wake the next day. He had murdered a kid the day before, and he went to a wake like he hadn't just let a kid bleed out on his own floor. So Gacy became active at this point in the Moose Lodge, and from there, the Jolly Jokers. The Jolly Jokers were these group of guys that dressed up as clowns, and they would go to hospitals and cheer up sick kids. And Gacy took to clowning so well. Like, he was made to be a clown, as messed up as that says. And he was doing so great. And he had all these awesome tricks and illusions that he'd do for the kids. And they loved him so much. His favorite was the invisible dog trick, where he would pretend that he had an invisible dog, and he'd put a water bottle in his little pocket, and he'd push on it, and it looked like the invisible dog peed. Like, the kids thought it was the funniest thing ever, and it was like he was made to clown. And this is when Pogo the Clown was officially born. Most people are afraid of clowns, and most of it is because of John Wayne Gacy. I don't really mind them. I actually have a lot of friends that are clowns. You make your own decision on clowning, but don't let Gacy ruin it for you, because it's a good art. So at this point, Gacy's really comfortable with himself. He's really liking where he's going. He's got a good job, and he's clowning now. And he eventually decides to come out to his wife as bisexual. And she did not respond well. She ended up leaving him immediately, taking her 2 kids and leaving. And this was a huge thing for Gacy to finally come out as bisexual. And to the day he died, he would not come out as gay. He would never say that he was gay, despite him pretty much never sleeping with his wives, besides to have kids. It really stems from his relationship with his dad. Like, his dad wanted him to be this hyper-masculine man, and Gacy never lived up to that, so he would never admit to himself or to anybody else that he was gay. Gacy started this new persona going through this. When he became comfortable with himself as Pogo the Clown, he decided to have another persona besides clowning, and this was Jack Hanley. Jack Hanley was a police officer that Gacy encountered in his younger years, and he respected him so much. That's what he wanted to be. He loved the authority that Jack could have over anybody. So that's who he wanted to become. So he did. He got a cop costume, or fake uniform, I guess, and he had a gun. And this is when he started pretending that he was a police officer. You know, impersonating a police officer is a serious crime, but didn't really matter because he didn't have a lot of repercussions for any of his actions. He would start going around, he would look for mostly male sex workers, the less dead, and he would, get them in his car, and he would threaten them, be like, I'm a police officer, you have to do what I say, I won't say anything about you doing sex work if you just listen to me. And this is the main thing that we've seen time and time again, is the intimidation and the control factor of what really gets Gacy off. He wants to be in charge, and that's the most important thing. Gacy continued to be a very well-respected member of his community, and people really liked him, and then they would always love going to hang out at his parties, and nobody really seemed to notice that his wife had left him and that his stepdaughters were gone. They also didn't seem to notice that he found a boy, strangled him, and buried him underneath his barbecue pit, which is horrifying that somebody can get away with it that easy. But the most horrifying part is that he had parties in his backyard all the time, where he was the barbecue pit master, and people were standing and dancing on a burial ground that they had no idea existed. For a while, Gacy's urges started to chill out. He was doing okay, these other things in his life were making it so he didn't have to fulfill these urges all the time. But these urges never went anywhere. As much as he wasn't acting on them all the time, they were prevalent still. And they became floating back to the surface again eventually. And at this point, this is when Gacy really solidified finding any members of the Less Dead that he could attack and nobody would notice would be gone. He also got to the point where he eventually murdered 2 more of his KFC employees. And these employees, he actually asked to dig trenches in his basement for him. He said to them that it was for, plumbing issue, and that they were just helping him out and he'd pay him money. But it turns out these boys were actually digging their own graves, and they had no idea. Alright guys, at this point we have all of our spices lined out. We're going to throw them together into this jar. We're going to put them in the grinder, and we will get moving. Alright everybody, next we're going to get the chicken nice and ready for frying. So first we got to make our dredge. We have 2 cups of flour, 1/2 cup of cornstarch, and our spice one that we just made. So I'm going to put it all together in a shallow dish. It's easy to mix and to dredge in. There we go, our spices. Just going to do a quick whisking, make sure it is all together. Sounds good. And next, one of the biggest awesome tips I ever learned about frying chicken that has made it so much better, you should take some of your marinade, like a couple tablespoons, and you should pour it into your dredge. I learned this from J. Kenji Lopez. This trick has made my chicken 1,000 times better. So really what you're gonna do is kind of mix it all up. This is what makes that craggy, awesome crust on your chicken. It makes it, you know, the way exactly you want fried chicken to be. So once you get it all nice and mixed in there, so you're already seeing there's these thicker chunks in there, that's what's gonna make it so delicious. Now we're gonna start dredging, and we're gonna start where we left off. So at this point, Gacy had just murdered 2 of his KFC employees, had them dig their own graves in his basement. There are 2 other of his employees that we do need to talk about as well. That is Michael Rossi, no relation, and David Cram. Now, David Cram decided to eventually move in with Gacy, and him and Michael Rossi were actually helping Gacy lure boys into the house. And sometimes they would also help with the body disposal. This isn't definitely, you know, solidified true in court, but that is what most people think is exactly what happened. So David Cram's living with Gacy at this point, you know, odd choice of a roommate, but sometimes you just need somewhere to live. And one night, David decides to go out. It's his birthday, so he got drunk with his friends. He's hanging out. And he comes home. And Gacy's just standing there, dressed like Pogo the Clown. And I can't imagine how alarming it'd be to walk into your home and see a 40-year-old man, you know, dressed as Pogo the Clown. But, you know, sometimes you just gotta live somewhere. So Gacy's like, hey, man, I thought, you know, because it's your birthday, I'd do something special. So, you know, I dressed up like Pogo. I figured we could hang out, have some drinks, you know, it'd be a good time. So they're hanging out. They have some drinks. But then Gacy asked David Cram, he's like, hey, I want to show you this trick. And once again, he pulls out the hated rope trick. He asks Cram to put his hands behind his back. He binds him. But then he grabs the rope and he starts swinging him around. And David Cram's being swung around the apartment. He's like, what the hell is going on? Please stop. Stop it. Gacy wouldn't stop, so Cram used his army knowledge to kick him in the head. Gacy passes out. He falls over. And Cram eventually, he got the keys, he got away, and he locked himself in his bedroom. At this point, he didn't report anything. He hadn't done anything. And Gacy, once again, was getting away with more abuse. So at this point, Gacy's really becoming this other guy. You know, there's a separation between who he is as John Wayne Gacy, the guy that has the construction company and, you know, friends and is well respected, versus who he is when he is the other guy, when he is on the prowl for boys, when he has these urges that he just can't say no to. And this other guy is the one that takes over, and Gacy would sometimes wake up and not even know that he'd done anything wrong. He'd murdered somebody or raped somebody the night before. So he's really diverging into 2 MOs at this point, not just the rope trick, but we know the rope trick, which is the one where he'd put a rope over a guy's head, and he had a piece of wood attached to it. And he'd put the wood through a knot, and then he'd crank it at least 3 times until it was so taut that this boy would strangle to death. The other one was when he would take underwear shoved in these boys' throats, induce vomiting, and then they would choke on their own vomit and die. He also would torture these boys. He would burn them with candle wax. Sometimes he would shove pill bottles up their butts, which is horrifying. But there were some boys that actually did get away from Gacy, thank God. You know, he couldn't keep all of them, and sometimes they'd get out of his house. But one of these boys did say that, you know, there's a man that attacked me. His name's John Wayne Gacy. I can tell you where he lives. And the most messed up part was Gacy was impersonating officers at this point. He was still dressing up like a cop. He was still pretending to be Jack Hanley. And he had, you know, a fake badge and all of that. So this boy came forward and he said, hey, you know, this guy's pretending to be a police officer. And he had a gun. He forced me into a car. But nothing ended up coming of it. Unfortunately, like so many times where John Wayne Gacy should have been put away. And he wasn't. So at this point, we are in the spring of 1978. And the victim count is at 32. So right now we're finishing up this last piece of chicken. We're gonna get it ready. We're going to let it sit for a little while, get nice and craggy. And then we're gonna continue prepping and get this stuff in the fryer. All right, everybody, we're gonna get our shrimp ready for frying. So we are making a dredge here. I really love Old Bay when it comes to eating seafood. Most people do. It's amazing. So right here we have a half cup of flour, a teaspoon of salt, a half teaspoon of black pepper, and 2 tablespoons of Old Bay, 3 eggs beaten in the middle. And we are going to have a cup and a half of panko and 2 tablespoons of Old Bay. So we're just going to be dredging all the way through, get them all set, and we'll fry them a little bit. All right, so the last part we left off on was we were at a 32 body count. And unfortunately, there will be one more before the story is over. 1978, Robert Peist. Now, Peist works at a pharmacy. He's a high school kid, and he's super popular. He has a family that loves him. And this is a huge mistake that Gacy made when attacking Robert Peist, because he usually attacked the less dead, the people that nobody would notice that was missing. But Robert Peist is definitely going to be noticed that he was missing. He had people that cared about him, and were obviously going to be known. Peist worked at the pharmacy, and as soon as Gacy saw him, it was like that Looney Tunes, like jaw dropped, eyes bugging out of his head, which is horrifying to think about. But he saw Robert Peist, and that was it for him. He had to have him. So he went up to Robert, he talked to him, he was like, hey, I know you work here, you probably make okay money, but I have a construction company, and I'm sure you can make a lot more money if you come work for me. Peist thought about it, I'll get back to you, I'll talk to you later. They agreed to actually hang out later that day so Peist could find out a little bit more about John's construction company. Later that day, he wanted to go see him, and he was never seen again. Gacy was one of the last people that was seen talking to him. So immediately, people were like, hey, I saw John Wayne Gacy talking to Robert Peist when he was working at the pharmacy. Something should be done. You should probably check him out. So the police looked into John Wayne Gacy a little bit, and they noticed, oh my gosh, he has sodomy charges from Iowa, that he was in jail for 18 months. Should have been 10 years, but he was in jail for 18 months. He also has a lot of missing employees. Yeah, from all those times where he's managing at KFC, a lot of those employees have unknown whereabouts. So police and media are like, all right, definitely something to look into. So they start looking for a search warrant. They start going through the process of getting all of that done. The cops start tailing Gacy. They tailed him for 8 days. And at first, he's joking around. He's like, hey, come in for coffee, come in for a beer, hanging out with them, because you know how much Gacy loved policemen and men of authority. So they're coming around, and they're still tailing him. But soon, the paranoia sets in. Gacy's getting really nervous. He's realizing, I might not get out of it this time. Well, he starts spiraling. He is getting so nervous. Eventually, he goes to his lawyers. It's time. He has to go to his lawyers, tell him what happened. So he goes, he sees Sam Amirante, his lawyer, and he's like, hey, Sam, I killed 30 people, give or take a few. And then he leaves Sam's house. Sam, understandably, is a little freaked out by this, and he calls the police, and he says, I can't say why, but arrest this man any way you can. So this is lighting a fire under the cops' butts. They're like, we need to get working on the search warrant. We really need to get him in custody. So they're still tailing him, and they are processing the search warrant. At one point, Gacy's driving erratically. He's getting so nervous, he doesn't know what he's doing, and he gets pulled over by the cop that's tailing him. And the cop just kind of slaps him on the wrist, but he calls him a jag-off. And this sent Gacy over the edge. He hates being called a jag-off. One of his ex-wives used to call it to him. And this was the point of no return. He knew he was going to get caught, and he just spiraled out of control. So after that, he knew the cops were still following him, and he goes to the gas station. And he knows the gas station attendant. John, he always had that killer weed, man. So he went, and he gave the gas station attendant a couple joints. And he thought, like, oh, well, the police will surely arrest me now. But they held steady. They waited. They waited until that search warrant was going to come in. They didn't want to mess up anything in the processing or booking of him because they didn't want him to get off on a technicality. The cops still waited, and they watched. John decided to go to his friend Ron's house. And he goes to Ron's. He has a couple scotches. They're hanging out, and he's like, Ron, I killed like over 30 people. Ron's getting a little uncomfortable, obviously. Gacy leaves. Makes another stop. He's just going insane all across the county at this point. So his next stop is David Cram's new apartment. And David Cram's hanging out with Michael Rossi, like always, they're best friends. And he tells Cram and Rossi, hey guys, I killed 30 people, but it was for the Chicago Mafia, sure anybody would believe Gacy, a killer clown, worked for the mafia. He told them that, and David Graham and Michael Rossi still kind of stuck by his side like they have this entire time. So they told him, they're like, hey man, we'll take you to your lawyers. We'll take you to Sam's house so you can get this straightened away. And Gacy said, all right, fine, I'll go to my lawyers with you, but first, we need to go visit my dad's grave. So they pack up, they get in the car, and they head to the cemetery. Police are still tailing them at this point, watching every move just to make sure nothing's gonna go wrong. They see that Gacy is going to commit suicide on his dad's grave. They know that this is it, and they don't want him to get out in any way other than going to jail for the rest of his life or possibly getting put to the death penalty. Right before Gacy can kill himself, the cops step in. They get him, they book him, and he's finally, after a 6-year spree of murder, put into custody. And these would be the last moments that Gacy ever saw as a free man. Alright, y'all, we only have these couple scrimps left. We're gonna get them dredged and ready to go. After this, we're gonna make an amazing cocktail sauce for these to eat. And then we're gonna get cooking. Stick with me, we'll make some sauce, and then we're gonna finish this off. Alright, everybody, we are at the last part of prep for the day. We're gonna make this awesome, zesty cocktail sauce for our fried shrimp. What we're gonna put in it is a half cup of ketchup, 2 tablespoons of horseradish, 2 tablespoons of lemon juice, 1 teaspoon of hot sauce. You can use what you prefer. I used Frank's for this. And also 1 teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce. Did it. We're gonna put them all in this bowl. We're gonna use the tiny whisk. What's up, tiny whisk gang, Babish fam? And yeah, we're gonna get it going and everything will be ready. Where we last left off, Gacy finally in custody for the last time. The most exciting part of this entire day. So, after 6 years, 33 counts of murder, he is in custody. So, at this point, the police are getting the search warrant all set, and then they get to his house. And once they get to his house, they find the dreaded crawl space. I feel awful for whichever police officer was working that day and had to go check out that business, because I can't imagine the smell, let alone the sight. So they go, they find the crawl space, and they find dozens of bodies down there. And they report it back to the precinct, and as soon as they mention that to Gacy, he immediately starts confessing. So at this point, this monster is never going to get away. So he's confessed at this point. Now it's time to set up the trial. Now the trial, Gacy has Sam Amirante, huge piece of shit, as his lawyer. And they tried to plead insanity. And that got thrown out the window pretty much immediately because there's so much premeditation that was very evident that there was no way it could possibly have been insanity. As the trial came to a close, and after the media went crazy over the killer clown, John Wayne Gacy was finally sentenced to death by lethal injection. I know you shouldn't be excited about these things, but I am, because he's an absolute monster, and good riddance. We don't need him. So Gacy's finally sentenced to death. And after 16 years on death row, this monster, John Wayne Gacy, was finally taken off of this earth. Alright, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around with me for this episode on John Wayne Gacy. It was so much fun, but we still have the cooking to do. We all need that comfort of fried food, I think, after this horrendous story. So, get everything you have, get it ready, and remember, there's only one moral to this story. Don't work at KFC, because you will be moited. Alright, everybody, we're getting to the part where we finally get to cook all this food that we've been prepping. The way to get the best, crispest fries is to boil them. So you're pretty much blanching them. We're going to let them dry. We're going to fry them once, take them out, and then fry them again. And they are perfect, delicious, crispy, the best fries. So, first thing we're going to do, take our fries, put them in a big old pot. I'm not going to cook all of these because I made an insane amount of fries. I'm going to cover it with water. Water pressure is great here. This will only take 10 minutes. Fries are covered with water. We're going to put in a tablespoon of vinegar, white vinegar that is, and we're going to get this boiling. Once it gets to a boil, we're going to let it sit for 10 minutes in the boiling water. While we're doing that waiting, we need to get our oil hot and ready to go. frying oil. Use whatever you'd like. I have canola oil here. Learn this mistake. Don't fill up the oil too much, because then you're gonna spend like $20 on salt to clean your oven and your stovetop. So yeah, don't go too crazy. It's better to take a longer time and to find smaller batches. A little bit more in here. That looks pretty good for me. Get this going. And we're gonna let it get up to 350 degrees. Now you can fry at different temperatures. I like 350 for pretty much everything when it comes to frying because you don't want anything to get too dark. You know, if you cook your chicken too high, it'll get really dark on the outside, not done on the inside. So 350 is kind of a good sweet spot for frying. So we're gonna let all this come up to temperature and then we'll get cooking. All right, everybody, our potatoes have boiled now for 10 minutes. So we're gonna get them out of the boiling water and onto a paper-lined baking sheet. Here, and we just want them to be as even as possible. All right, so we're gonna let these now sit for 5 minutes. Let them dry out for a bit. Our frying oil is almost up to 350 degrees, and then we'll be ready to wrap. All right, everybody, we let those potatoes sit out for 5 minutes, so now it's time to do the first fry. So we're gonna put them in for a minute. Only put in about a third of the potatoes you make, or in general, just don't put too many in, because it will overflow and will cause a mess or a fire. Not speaking from personal experience whatsoever. Put them in here, and we are going to fry. So while they are in here, we want to keep agitating them. Better! We're gonna keep moving them around for a minute and get this first fry going. Awesome. All right, that first batch is done, but we want it to go back up to 350, so it sometimes takes a little longer. So keep an eye on your thermometer, let it get back up to 350 degrees. So we will have to wait a tiny bit. Then we're gonna fry the rest of these fries in batches until they're all done. We're going to let our fries sit out for 30 minutes, let them dry out completely before we do the last fry on so they're crispy and beautiful. We're gonna do our shrimp next and get that going while these fries are sitting. All right, our fries are drying out right now, so it is time to fry some scrimps. So they're all breaded, ready to go. We're gonna fry them for a minute at a time, do them in batches until they are done. And we're gonna drop them in. Again, gonna agitate them. Back to your home! All right, we're gonna get our last batch of shrimp into the fryer. All right, shrimp are beautiful and ready to go whenever. So we're gonna go on and get the chicken going and we will be pretty much done. All right, we're on to the last of the frying. We're gonna get the chicken in. So it's gonna be about 6 to 9 minutes, 350 degrees. You want your dark meat to be about 175 degrees. You want your light meat to be 165. So we're gonna use a thermometer, make sure, you know, nobody's gonna get sick from what you make. So let's drop some chicken in. Don't wanna put too much in once again. Put it in there. And while it's frying, you know, you're gonna agitate it a little bit again. I think your TikToks are stupid. And we're gonna watch it, you know, 6 to 9 minutes. So we're gonna get our thermometer and we're gonna make sure it's right up to temp. Alright, everybody, we are down to the last 2 chickens, so we're going to throw them in the fire. Once again, about 6 to 9 minutes. 165 for white meat, 175 for dark meat. Get these going, and then we can move on to the last fry of the fries. Yeah, the last fry of the fries. Alright, the last piece of chicken. Just want to make sure it is in the correct temp. Chicken is all set, so next step, we're going to do this last fry on the french fries. And then we finally get to eat. Alright, everybody, we are on the final step. We are going to do the second fry on the french fries. So we're going to put them in for 3 minutes. Once again, 350 degrees. Let them go there. And, you know, cook them to your personal preference. All right, so it's been about 3 minutes. So you can take your fries out now, but I am definitely a person that likes my fries crisp. So we're going to let them sit in for another about 30 seconds because it's just the best way to do it for me. All right, everybody, we're still doing our fries in batches. So after they sit out for about a minute on a wire rack, or if you don't have a wire rack, you can always do paper towels on a sheet tray. I'm going to throw them into a bowl. We're going to dust them with that awesome Cajun seasoning that we made. Just going to throw a little bit on there. You know, tread lightly if you have a heat index problem, but I like it spicy, so we're just going to toss them in here. That one's for my dog, except it'll blow her butthole up. But this is what we're going to do. We're going to let them out. We're going to do the last batch, and we will be done. All right, guys. We are on the last batch of food. The last batch of french fries. So 3 minutes. We're going to be all set. We're going to drop them in, sit them around, let them sit for 3 minutes, and pull them out. You ready to go? All right, everybody. Here we have it. John Wayne Gacy's final meal on death row. We made the KFC fried chicken. We made the fried shrimp. We made the french fries. And we didn't make the strawberries because I don't have a strawberry bush and I have no means of doing so. And here we are. We have this final meal. I want to say thank you all so much for listening today. I appreciate it so much. I am so excited to continue this project and show you guys the disgusting world that we live in, but also some awesome food that we can experience. So I want to say, if you like what I'm doing, please subscribe. And if you have any ideas of anybody you want me to cover next, please put it in the comments, because maybe that'll be the next one I do. Just want to say thank you all so much for letting me do what I want to do. I'm so excited to be here. But in the last words of John Wayne Gacy, all I want to say is, kiss my ass.